Are you recording?
Correct.
Great. Thanks. Welcome everyone to the July 12th meeting of the Private Force Accord Mitigation Advisory Committee. Let's start. Andy, could you please call the roll?
Yes, I will. Please just respond in the affirmative if you're present. Chad Washington.
Yep, I'm here, Andy.
Got it. Bob Van Dyke.
Here.
Kristen Rivard.
Here, and I'll be on camera in a bit.
Thank you. Heath Curtis. Okay. Fran Cafferata.
Here.
Andrew Perky. Mark Stern.
Here. Am I on camera? I can't tell at the moment.
Your screen's on camera, but not you. It's black.
Okay, I'll work on it.
Thanks. All right, Bob. Well, we got at least 5 here for a quorum. The only ones not present as of now is Andrew Perky and Heath Curtis.
Could you also go ahead and call the ex officio members?
Of course. Mark Grandbemmer.
Present.
Jennifer Weichel.
Present.
Kate Wells.
Here.
Chris Allen.
Here.
Sarah Gregory.
Present.
All right, thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. The next item is the approval of the agenda, and I want to note that we need to modify the agenda. Initially, we just had item number 5 minutes for the MAC endorsement of the rules, but as per correspondence I've shared by email, I think there's some things that require some more discussion by the committee. So I think that's going to take longer than that. I think what we'll do is we'll take the time we need on the MAC endorsement, and I think that will then push some of the items out. Hopefully we can get to Debbie Colbert's director's office presentation, and even if possible, Jennifer Weichel's HCP presentation, although Jennifer has generously noted she could bump her presentation out later. So I'm getting a feedback loop a little bit. I don't know if anybody else is there. There, that stopped. Okay,
hey, Bob,
thanks.
We got Heath here who's jumped in. I believe that's him just saying he's present now.
Great,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you. Apologies.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Andrew. So having said that, to be clear, I'm suggesting that we move forward with the agenda, but we expand the MAC endorsement, item 5, to the time needed to cover the topics there, since that one's time sensitive, in that the committee wants to have our feedback to the commission clear when they make their decision next month. So having said that, can I call for a motion to approve the modified agenda?
I'll move to approve the modified agenda, Bob.
Is there a second?
A second.
Is there, it's been moved to approve and second. Any discussion or objection?
Who was the second?
Right. Pardon me?
Who was the second?
I heard Mark Stern, I believe, the second.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any discussion or objection? All right, hearing none, the agenda is approved. Let's go to the next item, which is the consent agenda, which is the meeting minutes. I want to thank Andy for doing a good job with sufficient detail in there to capture decision making. That's my view, at least. Is there any objection to approving the consent agenda minutes? Comments? Objections? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved. Let's go now to public comment. I believe there is some public comment. Andy, I'll turn it over to you to facilitate that. I'll just say that depending how many people, we have 10 minutes allotted. Generally, we encourage folks to offer 3 minutes worth of comment. So, Andy, please.
All right, thanks, Bob. So yeah, if you have a request, I'm checking the chat now, or please raise your hand virtually. All right, I got Kelly Beamer with Colt. Feel free to unmute.
Okay. Good morning, committee, and thank you so much for the opportunity to comment. My name is Kelly Beamer. I'm the Executive Director for the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts. We represent over 30 organizations that work with willing landowners to conserve land through voluntary measures. And I just want to put my metaphorical hats off to you for your incredible work to put together a flexible and effective grant program that I think is ready to hit the ground and have measurable impacts. I'm here to comment on the specific components around eligibility. We're grateful that land acquisition and through easements and fee title is called out as a strategy and a fundable action. We have a pipeline of projects that are ready to show immediate impact for the target species that you have that we are looking at. But I want to call out two components for the committee to consider around the rules, ORS. So number one, I would like to clarify that the fund would be available for the reimbursements for acquisitions. A lot of land trusts are able to move quickly and able to conserve a property that would otherwise be subdivided or converted. And it might not be in the same timeline as the grant program. So we have partners like Craft 3, that is a nonprofit community development financial institution, CDFI, that can make those funds available to land trusts. They can acquire the land, and then once the public funding stream is available, they can pay back Craft 3 with a low interest loan. So I want to clarify that the rules would indeed allow for the reimbursement for land acquisition. I also, on that note, would recommend that the committee would allow for projects that perhaps have been being built even before the launch of the grant program be eligible for up to 2 years prior. It sometimes can take a while for projects to come into a ripe state. So we want to have a robust pipeline and would love for the eligibility to consider projects within the last 2 years. My second point is I am requesting that the fund consider due diligence costs associated with land acquisition. There's a great deal of work that goes on before a project is purchased, including an easement, mapping, title review, and the staff time required to put the projects together. So with other funding programs, for example, at OWEB, if the project is voted and approved for funding, those due diligence costs then are also included. So those would be my my 2 points, and I apologize I haven't had time to put suggested language into the specific administrative rules that you're looking at, but I wanted to be able to share those with the committee. So thank you very much, and let me know if you have questions.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm going to ping back to Bob here in a minute, but I did just want to note the commission, I'll put in the chat here, the commission inbox for comments also, if you would like to provide some suggested language at a later time. Bob, I'll go back to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Andy. Andy, do we have any other comment requests?
I didn't get anything over email. It's looking like we don't have any other hands raised. We'll give it just another second here.
Well, given that that's the case, I'd like to offer the committee a chance to speak with Kelly, since we have her here and she's got a specific question, and we've got that language in the draft rules that we're going to discuss today in the meeting. So just want to open to if there are any comments, suggestions, or questions for Kelly. Now's a chance to have her here to discuss those. Mark, and then Heath.
Yeah, hi Kelly, thanks for your comments there. I guess just the question as I think about, and I support the idea of the due diligence being included, because there is some startup work to those kinds of land acquisition projects and easements, so that makes sense. And for a project that started recently, I can appreciate that if it started up in between grant cycles, so it may be something that was, within the last 12 months. I was a little less sure about going back 2 years from the start of the grant program, and I guess I'm just curious what your sense is. how many projects are actually sitting out there in that 2-year window at the moment that would be affected on whether that was included or not?
Thanks, Mark. I don't know definitively how many projects, but I know that there are indeed projects that are still working on their capital campaign for reimbursement that could sort of enter in line when the grant becomes when the grant cycle opens, so that we would ensure there would definitely be projects ready to go right off the bat, because I know it is coming up pretty quickly. So my suggestion is only that would be for right now within the first opening up of the grant. It would start with that 2-year back horizon and then go forward. So I know of at least 2 off the top of my head.
Yeah, okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Heath Curtis, please.
Kelly, if you guys were to buy land on credit, like with Craft 3, and like come to us and say, hey, we want you to fund this project, and we didn't because we had other priorities, where does that leave you? I'm a little uncomfortable with our friends in this effort, you know, taking risk and then coming back to us and like us putting you in a tough spot.
Yeah, I definitely hear you on that. It really has to be it would be a very close alignment with our land trust working with Andy to ensure the eligibility of the program and the likelihood, like with OWEB, when these situations come through, have an honest conversation about how much is in the acquisition funding sort of account left and how this would rank and the likelihood. And I think there's a really good gut check. I only honestly know one instance in the 10 years I've been doing this job where a Craft 3 loan was given with the expectation of a public grant that didn't come through. And often it's not for the whole thing. It would be a piece, you know, this fund would be filling a piece of the pie, so to speak, in that capital campaign. So it's sort of the leading on the practice and risk tolerance of land trusts that there would be enough funding and it would align with the criteria of the campaign. And frankly, if it's a good enough project, I think that we would be, you know, there just wouldn't even be a question. Sometimes land trusts just make that call to Craft 3 and say it's solid enough with enough funding sources. We're going to take this leap. We need to acquire it from the willing seller right now. So I don't have a perfect answer either for you, Heath, but it's a good question. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to call on myself and just note, Kelly, of course, one thing we built into this program is the urgent grant as well. So that gives you a possibility for when there is something that's extremely time sensitive, you haven't acquired it yet, but an opportunity arises to seek funding without having to wait for the normal, what looks like now annual grant cycle to come along. So just a comment.
That's great.
Anything
Bob.
else for Kelly? Okay, thank you very much, Kelly.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll end our public comment and we'll go to the next item, which are a couple of updates from Andy on the staff report. Andy, over to you.
Great. Give me just a minute here, guys, to get my mini screens in order here. All right, so yeah, I'm going to give brief updates here on the first 2, and then I'm going to ping over to Sarah for a budget update. First one is an update on just monitoring requirements, and then we're going to do the grant management system. So for monitoring requirements, you know, as it stands, to keep the program easy and simple for applicants, monitoring we don't have as a requirement right now for applicants, but they can request funding for post-implementation monitoring if they need to. And I bring this up just to inform the committee that we are working with the services to better understand what monitoring may look like in the future. What is the need for the habitat conservation plan as that gets rolled out in the coming years? So we're trying to strategize that. So I just want to bring that up for everyone's consideration. Although for these first 2 years, until we get the HCP, all applicants, as it stands now, will be required to do quarterly reports, quarterly or at release a yearly report. Nonetheless, if they want a reimbursement, they will have to submit a progress report that will have about 5 questions in it that kind of revolve around monitoring. But just want to let you all know, it is somewhat looser right now for monitoring. I would expect in the future that we may tighten those reins a little bit or ask for a little bit more from the applicants. But I just want to provide that quick update to everyone, including grantees on the call. Moving on to the next update, the grant management system. So we've been working since February or January or February to get a brand new grant management system ready to implement and streamline this grant program, which is, as you may all know, or you've heard me say, is one of the largest in ODFW's history, right? It is a very large program. So we've been working with our procurement department to explore a permanent grant management solution. That's about 2 years out. In the meantime, we are looking at a procurement for an interim solution. It is a much smaller system, not as many bells and whistles, but it will get us off the ground for the next 2 years. It will have applicant portals, reviewer portals, pretty much everything, so we don't have to do a submission via Word document or anything. That's what we're trying to avoid. We are trying to launch that interim system for our first solicitation. At the very least, if we don't make it for the first solicitation, I will migrate everything over by the start of next year, when I expect for us to have that interim solution in play. So then next year, applicants would submit through the portal. So I just wanted to give that brief update. Again, 2025 is when we should have our full grant management system solution off the shelf. Start of next year, we should have the interim solution. And yeah, at this point, that was really fast, but I know we have a lot to talk about. But yeah, any questions, please? I see Mark's hand.
Yeah, I'm just curious if you can give a sort of a general estimate of the cost of both the short-term grant system and the long-term one. And is the long-term one something PFA is going to pay for, or is the department going to pay for it as part of a broader departmental investment?
Yeah, so great question. For the short-term solution, well, for both solutions, the PFA will pay for its part of using the grant management system. What that looks like, we're still looking at costs now. For the short term, we're looking at across 2 years, a cost of around $20,000. And that's hopefully partnering with Travel Oregon to help use their system. We're exploring that, and that's reducing our costs. Now, for the long-term solution, I don't have a cost estimate for you yet. I hope to get that. We can't do that until we run a formal procurement RFP. That's a much longer process, but hopefully by summer of next year, we'll be able to get some estimates in, and then maybe some demos down the line. But I couldn't even ballpark that larger number for you.
Okay, thanks.
Kristen?
I was just going to encourage you to identify a couple of regular grant applicants, potentially from OWEB programs or another, to do some pilot work on whatever system you implement. Right. I think that can be really helpful for finding some of the challenges and errors with proposals. So that's all I had. Thank you.
That's a great idea. Thank you for that one, Kristen. And again, in case I wasn't clear, Mark, on your earlier point, anything for the PFA use will come out of the or as administrative cost for the system.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that, Andy. Those updates. I did just want to note briefly on the monitoring. There is one piece where a monitoring plan is required with the application, and so most of the things regarding monitoring are made. I appreciate that there's a much bigger monitoring question out there about the effectiveness of the mitigation for the HCP, which is really a bigger conversation about the services and the HCP application. And I'm sure ODF's in the middle of that as well. Thanks for that, but we'll discuss that monitoring just a little bit more in the OARs. So back to you and to Sarah, I think, for the budget update.
Yeah, I'm going to ping down to Sarah there.
Yeah, hi everybody. Sarah Rife, Habitat Division Administrator. Thanks for taking the time to be here with us for this meeting. I know it's a busy one. I guess, not much news to report here. We are still awaiting the governor's signature on the legislatively adopted budget. But what we anticipate is the same thing I shared with you last month, where we're carrying forward the, it's just slightly less than, well, actually, I don't have that number in front of me. We're carrying forward the 10 million basically that we were given in general fund from last biennium minus administrative costs thus far, plus the amount we've received in harvest tax revenue. In terms of this budget, we were legislature appropriated an additional 10 million in general fund and 12 million in spending authority. So we will have more revenue in the fund than we have spending authority. We'll have plenty to get through the first RFP. As I said, there's 12 million there. We're anticipating allotting 10 million max for that first RFP in terms of our spending authority, leaving enough left over for administrative costs. But then we'll anticipate going right back around to legislature in the short session and requesting the rest of that spending authority for the remaining revenue that's in the fund, so that we can be prepared to offer either urgent grants or regular grants in that fall 2024 RFP. Any questions on that?
No questions here. Just to confirm though, and thank you, Sarah, it sounds like we're getting what we expected, at least with what went through the legislature. Obviously still waiting the governor's signature
That's
to
right.
finalize. Great.
That's right. I think in future meetings, we should likely talk about, our spend plan. I know the authors envisioned a $10 million annual contribution in general fund alongside that harvest tax revenue. And that original vision is more than what has been appropriated thus far. And so how does that uncertainty play into how we design how much we want to allocate in each of these RFPs going forward? So I think we should have that discussion in future meetings, if that makes sense. Keith.
It does. And it's a bigger question in some ways too, obviously.
Yes.
Thank you though,
Yeah.
Sarah. Heath?
Okay, we can have that conversation at a future meeting.
Great, thank you.
I mean, I was just going to offer, I think that there's some special circumstances here. That is to say, there were $10 million sitting there that weren't expended, just giving timing of the program. But I think we should proceed under the presumption that all of the money agreed to is going to be funded. Alternatively, if it's not, I think we should proceed under the presumption that this is all going to go away. That is to say that the HCP is going to fail. And so I think that it's incumbent on us to move as though the state is going to observe the obligations we've agreed to.
I agree. I'm certain that's above the pay grade of most of us in the room, but I agree with you, Heath, and there's work for us to do to communicate that message separately from ODF&W as well. Okay, any other questions or comments about the budget or the other items Andy touched on, the grant management system or the monitoring topic? Okay, well, let's turn now then to the PFA rules, which I am dearly hoping that this is the last time this is an agenda item for us, at least this year. They may need revision in the future of this. What I think we hope to do today, just to cue this up, is to finally approve the document that we will transmit to the commission and the department, certainly as our recommendation for what the rules look like. I'd like to get before we go into the rules, and I've sent a document out flagging, I think Andy will put that up, flagging some discussion areas. Andy, I wonder, or maybe you, Sarah, can just tell us a little bit about where we go from here. So we will have, come hopefully to agreement on a document today. Public comment is coming in still. What we're coming to agreement on isn't exactly the same as what was proposed initially in the rules. So what comes up to the commission in the end? What will they be? Will they be getting a recommendation? Will they just be getting all the materials? What lands on their plate for decision making? Just to help give us some context here.
Yeah, Andy, do you want me to take that, or you want?
Yeah, you're more than welcome.
So the commission meeting is August 4th. packets get mailed to the commission on July 20th. So with our discussion today and any public comments that are received, I think, Andy, when are we meeting on the 18th to kind of produce what we consider to be our final draft version? If there's anything that comes up prior to the 18th that we believe needs, can help improve or needs to be incorporated into the OARs, we are considering sort of our draft final version to be done on the 18th so that it can go in the commission packets on the 20th. Meanwhile, and that's so that in the commission packets, they're going to get sort of a background summary of the PFA program and the administrative rules. They're going to get these staff's recommendation to approve the rules with that version attached. And we're also just including as attachments, I think, although we need to see if that's the direction the director's office wants to go, some of those associated documents that sort of give the commission the full picture of the program. But the only thing they're approving are those administrative rules. The rest is just background material. So there still will be public comments rolling in potentially to that commission inbox. But those after the 20th, those are not, or after the 18th, actually, those are not going to be incorporated into the version that's in their packets. But they can certainly look at those public comments that are submitted all the way up to the 4th, and then any oral comments that are provided during the public meeting on the 4th as well. And so from the dais, they could take a look at some of those late arrival public comments and ask staff to incorporate some edits into the final version that they approve that day. But the version that we give them on the 18th is going to be staff's recommendation, and then it's up to the commission to make any final edits from there.
Thanks, Sarah. That's helpful. I think to the extent the staff recommendation is different from the MAC recommendation, it'll be helpful for us to know just like what you offered that was different and help us understand why. So,
and I can say that barring, if a public comment comes in that points at some error, some like obvious, like, oops, let's fix that language or let's clarify that. I don't anticipate us. We're ready to be done with this too. So I don't anticipate us tinkering beyond today's conversation unless it is some sort of like something's wrong or just could it improve transparency.
And that's totally fair. Just if there, that may well happen, it'll be good for us to just be able
and
to
we're
track
happy
that.
Yeah. So we'll send you the packet that goes to the commission so that you can just see the full thing. But we're happy to flag any of those last minute red lines that may occur between now and then.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, that's helpful. Just has DOJ looked through all this and has sort of DOJ signed off on the current draft?
Yes.
Yeah,
multiple times.
Thanks.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, let's now go to the final draft, or the hopefully near final draft, the draft of the rules that we'll be voting on today. And I flagged on there a few things for discussion. So I thought what we could do is just go sequentially through and look at some of those edits. Zooming in a bit would be helpful for me on that, Andy. And obviously, if anyone else has other edits, this is the time to call them out. Fortunately, we've got the line numbers there to help direct us. So, so let's just go ahead and go through the different sections. Section 000, the purpose there. Any comments or questions on the purpose? Okay, let's go to the definitions. 0010. Any comments, questions, additions on the definitions section? Okay, let's go then to 0020. This is the first area where I flagged a couple of items, items 2 and items 3. And these have to do with the role of the MAC and the department in the mitigation fund and the recommendations for the uses of the money. So I guess let's actually go to 3 first, where there's a proposed edit there from the department, from Andy. It the proposed new language is the department shall expend monies in the mitigation fund for projects advised by the MAC to the department and approved by the commission. So an earlier version said projects recommended by the department in collaboration with the MAC. So this new language more strongly directs the department to fund projects advised by the MAC to the department. So any comments or questions about this section? Heath Curtis.
I like the direction that's going personally. I wondered if it advised by is kind of odd drafting. Do you mean recommended by the MAC to the department?
That sounds clearer to me.
That was just originally pulled from the bill. It's 1501. That's why that was just pulled from there. But if we want to change it back to recommended.
Yeah, I mean, it's consistent with advice from, and I'd say advised by, I'm not even sure that means what I think we're meaning it to say. And so I guess I would suggest that it be project recommended by the MAC to the department.
That makes sense. It sounds like the project is almost getting advice in that earlier instruction there. So, which I'm sure could use. But in any case, recommendation sounds better. Are any more discussion or comments? Are folks comfortable? I guess I'll put it this way. Are there any objections to projects recommended by the MAC to the department? Being any objections? Okay, well, hearing none, I'm going to we'll approve that change in 3A now to read projects recommended by the MAC to the department. Let's go up 1 to 2, and 2 says there, the department shall fund projects approved by the commission with funds from the PFA mitigation fund consistent with the PFA grant rules. You'll see I put in a comment there that I think it should say shall award grants consistent with advice from the PFA MAC. And the reason I suggest that is because that specific language is in Senate Bill 1501, Section 32(3)(b). It says that the commission shall award grants with advice from the private forest accord mitigation, consistent with advice from the PFA MAC. So that's my suggested change in the language to make it more specific that the MAC is playing a role there in number 2, which I think we're actually capturing in 3, but that's my suggestion. Heath Curtis.
Personally, I like that recommendation, Bob. Would there be any harm in including both? That is to say, consistent with advice from the PFA MAC and these PFA grant rules?
Makes sense to me. Andy, I see you've got your hand up.
So the reason I'm commenting on this is consistent with these PFA grant rules was an addition from DOJ for clarity of incorporation of this entire document. So that's why that was originally there. So I just want to clarify that.
Well, it certainly should be kept then per Heath's point, I would say. Other comments from anybody on this suggested change consistent with advice from the PFA MAC and with these grant fund rules. So we put both of them there. So I guess we just keep it as it is, consistent with these PFA grant rules and with advice from the PFA MAC. Comments or questions, concerns about that?
Well,
Yeah, Andy, I think that would be okay and still consistent with DOJ to add that new phrase in there.
Yep.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I was just going to say that makes sense to me. I like it having both of those in there.
Heath?
I would, the way you stated that, I would still flop them around the other way, Bob. When you said consistent with these PFA grant rules and with advice from the PFA MAC, I think that, you know, that doesn't necessarily require that it be consistent with that advice. That kind of is freestanding. And so what I would say is consistent with advice from the PFA MAC and with these PFA grant rules.
Agreed. That's clearer. Other comments on the drafting, Mark?
Maybe just a personal preference. I like the word recommendation better than advice. And to me, it's just clearer conveyance of what the MAC is saying as opposed to, and how it will be received rather than advice.
Yeah, I don't disagree. My only concern there is that the statute says advice, and so I kind of like to follow the statute.
That's fine then. If that's what the statute says, I'm good with that.
Okay. Are there any objections to these amendments as described? Okay, hearing none, we'll ask Andy to make those changes in the final draft. That'll be the one we vote on. So let's go on down then to well, actually anything in 0030 that folks want to bring up on the purpose and duties. Anything in 0040 on the grant program. I just made a small suggested edit in the verbiage there instead of needing to occur to that need funding. Section 0050, Mark Stern, please.
Yeah, going back to 004, I guess just for consistency on number, I guess it's line, that same line, 117. Well, I see there's an edit there. So I was just going to suggest.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, fumbling on myself. I was going to suggest that it be consistent with the definition, and I can see that edit makes it that way. So I'm withdrawing my comment here.
Okay, let's go to 0050 on the mitigation regular fund grants. I've got a suggestion here as well. The current language said the department, in collaboration with the MAC, shall offer regular grant funding solutions for proposals, etc. And I've suggested here that language be changed to the department at the direction of the MAC. And the reason I did is because Senate Bill 1501 says the MAC, quote, shall solicit and review grant applications. So it feels to me like this makes it clear that the MAC is the driver. I'm not sure in practice that it makes much difference, because I think we'll have these same kinds of relationships where everyone's talking about, okay, time to offer the regular grants, time to offer the urgent grants. Let's sort of work together and do it. But I think it does make it clear in this construction that the MAC actually needs to sign off or say something to ODF&W to go ahead and do it. Where in the other construction, the department in collaboration, it feels like the department's, well, it's not clear what in collaboration means, actually. So so anyway, that's my thinking on that one. And to keep with parallel structure, we do the same thing in 0060, where the same phrase appears in collaboration with at the direction of. So I'd like to open up that for comments or questions, thoughts on that one. Heath Curtis.
Just another endorsement of your suggestion, Bob. I think that's a good idea.
Chad Washington.
Same, Bob. I think that's a good suggestion that we should look to adopt.
Any other thoughts or about this one? Okay, well, hearing no objections, I'm going to ask Andy to incorporate that in, and that will be part of the final draft. I guess I'd like to express my enthusiasm for the speed at which we're moving through these. Gives me hope for the rest of the meeting. Yeah, similarly, that's in 0060 is that same in collaboration with, getting at direction of, for the same reason. maybe some trickier questions here, getting toward the final section, 0070. Mark.
Oh, hey,
Stevens,
Bob.
please. Yeah,
Mark,
sorry.
yeah.
Yep, I'm sorry, skipped ahead there. Yeah, Mark, did you have something on?
Yeah, hi, thanks.
0050 or
I think
0060?
line 146 and 0060. Again, just a clarification to be consistent with the definition, needs for critical needs projects that are time sensitive and high priority that are in need of funding more quickly than available in the regular grant cycle. And I guess I think it's just really important that we keep reiterating that it's not whenever you want just because it wasn't convenient for you to apply during the regular grant cycle. It really needs to be for a funding need that's specific and didn't line up with the regular grant cycle. So I just don't want us to be put in a position where we're routinely getting grants because somebody says, oh, well, we can apply for an urgent grant. So it's again, just reiterating what we've already stated here several times.
I think it's a good
Yeah.
suggestion. It is mentioned in a prior section, but I think we should have it in the actual urgent grant subsection of the rules here. That's a good suggestion. Any comments, objections to that amendment from Mark? Okay, well, hearing none, we'll include that amendment, which again just notes that the urgent grants are for time sensitive that cannot be addressed through the regular cycle. Thank you for that, Mark. All right, let's go to the next section, 0070. Question on eligibility here. Our earlier draft on line 170 included individuals, that individuals could be applicants. And it also said organizations. The current draft drops individual and modifies it with non-governmental organization. Sarah, do you think you could speak a little bit to that issue on the complexity potentially of having individuals eligible here?
Yes, thank you. And I'm glad we're flagging this one just so the committee can kind of be aware this is a little bit of an evolution since the last time we reviewed. All along when I think about the size and scope of this grant program and the size of the grants that we're going to be offering, all along it's made me a little bit nervous to refer to individuals. I checked with OWEB. They stopped offering grants to individuals a long time ago because on the program side, they found tremendous workload was being spent, tremendous time being spent and staff time being taken to work with individuals who may not necessarily have the background and expertise to build the robust grant application, who have to be walked through all of the insurance requirements. Individuals also struggle to acquire the insurance sometimes necessary for the projects. And so for those reasons, they just made the program and eventually administrative rule decision to no longer allow granting to individuals. Now, that being said, we don't want to preclude offering awards to small forest landowners. And so my proposal is that individuals need to partner with an organization in their applications and or be sponsored by an organization in their applications. I think part of my interest here is that, you know, this is just our starting place and we want to, you know, we're trying to move really quickly here. We're trying to set ourselves up for success. And so I have this notion of simplicity and, you know, we can add more flexibility as we get experience, but I want to make sure we can deliver out of the gate here. Sort of it's harder to pull back, you know, if you offer something up front, it's harder to pull it back later. And so these are our rules. We can always change them later, but at least for the moment, that's my suggestion, is that eligibility, and I'm open to a clarification here to make that point more clear, that individuals, if partnered with an organization, are eligible. But that's my proposal.
Thank you,
That's
Sarah.
the direction I think that's the direction that as a program we kind of need to be going for the moment.
Thank you, Sarah. Heath?
Boy, I'm just scrambling here. My comments with regard to non-governmental organization, I mean, just read literally, that probably works, but there's a lot of like baggage associated with NGO in the sense that NGOs don't look like Halliburton, right? Those are like kind of two different things. And I don't think we mean to preclude Halliburton or Hampton or EcoTrust, but they're like private entities. And I just wondered if instead of that, if we could use like a definition of entity. I was just looking at chapter 174 and I can't quickly find it here, but I feel like that should at least say non-governmental or private organization, or other private organization, something like that. It would be helpful if we had a statutory definition of entity, but I'm struggling to put my hands on one quickly.
Great, but I guess just to ask for clarification there, Heath, the idea is to make sure that while it might be a traditional nonprofit, it might also be a for-profit entity.
Yes, correct.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. I see Chad and Fran with hands raised, and you could speak obviously to either the individual or the organization. Question. Chad.
Thanks, Bob. Just along the same lines as what Heath was saying, I think that we should, maybe just remove non-governmental and just say organization. And that also leaves an avenue open for a small landowner. Most of them operate under some kind of business organization, whether it's an LLC or some kind of structure, and then that would not preclude them from being able to apply for these as well. Their business could be the organization. And that also kind of helps protect the applicant if they're receiving funds under an LLC. There's some protections for them as an individual as well. So I guess the same point that Heath is making. Any business should be able to apply, whether it's a small family-owned business where they sell logs from their property, or a large institutional investor that needs some culvert replacement or a fish barrier removal project, something like that.
Fran.
Yeah, thanks. I've given this a lot of thought too. I know my voice is for the small woodland owner on this committee, and I am a small woodland owner. Our family, we are an LLC, so we would be eligible under this. I do know, and Sarah, I so appreciate where you're coming from, and I've been thinking about this a lot. I hate the idea of excluding. I do know of some small woodland owners that are just individuals that do a lot of restoration projects. I do think that they typically, like you say, do partner with other organizations just because of the scope of these projects. So like at first I was thinking, no, absolutely not. We have to keep individual on here. And I just appreciate the discussion and would like to hear from others too. I think, like you said, we can add it later. Like if we get feedback from people that are like, hey, I'm feeling excluded. The other thing is that the small forest land owners are also eligible under a program through the Department of Forestry that excludes everybody else. So it seems reasonable that we still have an avenue for them here. So all that to say, I think it's okay to take individual out, but I support Heath and Chad's point about making this a little more clear on what we mean by organization so that we don't exclude companies like Hampton and others. Thank you.
Sarah, please.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for kind of the understanding of that, and also this question of what term to use. Is it entity? Is it organization? I would like to probably do just a quick check on what is the best term. I understand the intent is to include both for-profit and nonprofit organizations, but I might do a quick outreach to our DOJ attorney, Erin Donald, and ask her to sort of look and see if there is some sort of more common statutory term. Maybe it is entity, as he thinks for putting that in the chat. I'll run that by her as well. And so just flagging that I'm open to changing that to the elimination of the non-governmental, and maybe we can circle back to you all with a recommendation for how to refer to organizations in the best way.
Well, I think that sounds helpful. I think maybe for today's purposes, we could approve it with just organization, and then you can circle with us to let us know.
If we change it, we can circle back to you all.
Yeah. Chad, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I won't take any longer on this, Bob. I'll just support where we landed with adding organization, circling back if we need more specific language, and also highlighting that this allows for OSWA to act as kind of an education organization around this grant fund for those small woodland owners. And, you know, maybe there's a way that OSWA can provide benefit to them without the additional burden of these small grants to ODFW staff. I think there's probably a role for them to play there too. That's all.
Great, thank you, Chad. And Heath.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you do talk to Aaron, I'm not sure that this sub 16 includes limited liability companies, so just give it some thought. I think that's pretty close. It may if you run the definitions through, but you know where we're going. And I support approving this language with the word organization without adding non-governmental for now.
Other comments on this section, either the question of individual or the organization question. Okay, well, hearing none, I think we can accept the leaving individual out, and then we'll approve the document we vote on today will include organization, but Sarah will do a little more diligence on the appropriate term and keep us informed. So thank you. All right, let's go to section 5 of this 0070 on eligibility. That was about eligible applicants. Below is about eligible projects, and this bears on the testimony we had today earlier in the meeting from Ms. Beamer. I'm seeing, so the first issue is in F on whether reimbursement of previous land acquisitions is an eligible project, and that's in line 194F. Chad, I see your hands up on this.
Yeah, Bob, I don't think we should be looking at retroactive reimbursement for acquisitions. I move that we remove that.
Okay, let's, if you don't mind, if you indulge us, Chad, we'll get to that specific if that's a motion, but let's see if there's a little more discussion first. Yeah.
That sounds good, Bob. Just
okay.
I thought we had talked about something similar in the last meeting about retroactive payment, and I'm more comfortable once the project has been awarded if they incur costs prior to the actual disbursement. But I guess that's something I thought we had kind of landed on, and this feels very similar.
Heath, please.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Chad. Chad, for the record, your hand's just staying up in between these, which is strategic. That's good work. For me, the way I was thinking about it was that to the degree that the land has already been acquired, then, and they are at that point fully committed to managing it in, you know, by virtue of the terms that they have agreed to under the acquisition, then I don't think that that's actually buying much for us. That is to say, nothing changes. If we decide not to reimburse them for the previous land acquisition, they've already bought it and already committed it to conservation. And I think what this causes is, my concern is that it allows for substitution. That is to say, we're coming in and making up money that they've already spent, which frees them up to spend money on other priorities that this committee is not involved in, right? That is to say that we aren't participating in whatever those monies are substituted for. I like what Chad highlighted there, and what I was going to suggest is, to the degree that the project has been awarded and they go borrow money and buy it subject to the payment being actually made by the state, giving like a timing issue, I'm okay with that. But this idea that they're gonna work with Andrew, and get his kind of nod prior to this committee's formal action, that it's gonna be, I mean, that's gonna put Andrew in a tough spot. He's like, yeah, I can deliver this for you. You know, he may or may not be able to. And so from my perspective, I think that I would support Chad's motion that we strike that language. Alternatively, we could include language that says post award, you know, reimbursement of acquisitions. But I'm not in favor of reimbursing retroactively commitments that organizations have made in advance of the MAC.
Kristen, please.
Yeah, I think I am sympathetic to the challenge that the land trust community faces in completing transactions like this. Grant review cycles and the application process are typically on a fairly long cycle of time. If we have one offering per year or two offerings per year, when you're in a real estate market where, say, a land trust is competing for a property with a private buyer, there is a sense of urgency oftentimes for a transaction to move forward, which is the role that, like, I think it's Craft 3 plays in some of these deals. So I'm very sympathetic to the challenge that that mode of business operation has. And I think that in order for land trusts to be effective, public funding and entities have to be willing to work on the scale that real estate transactions happen. And so I guess I have a little bit more openness to that. That said, I agree with the concern about sort of making commitments in advance of a review team and some of the things that Heath is raising in his comments. And so my hope that I'd like to maybe explore a little bit more is whether or not that urgent grant opportunity that we've included can be the place that we fill that gap. And so I could imagine both an entity coming in and requesting, hey, we have this hot opportunity, we've got to do a bunch of due diligence, we need some cash now to be able to go through that process. Since we're allowing project development and that part of work as an eligible thing, you could see a request come in to kind of jumpstart the project. You could also see a similar urgent request coming in to help with a capital campaign to close a deal. So I guess I just wanted to kind of test the waters from this group about whether that opportunity that this grant program has, which most of the other grant programs in Oregon that I'm aware of don't, is able to bridge the gap and kind of meet everybody's needs and concerns on that front. So I just wanted to poise that for conversation.
Chad, please.
Thanks for that, Kristen. And I agree that we should be able to use the kind of emergency funding lever here, but it would be a surprise to me if there was an acquisition that was going to result in such a significant improvement to the covered species habitat that happened on such a short timeline with such a large fund request. I mean, I would hope it wouldn't become regular, but I'd be open to including it as an option if there's an immediate need. Again, you would need to show like clear benefit in order for it to constitute an emergency, right? And since we're just talking about acquisitions here and how they benefit the covered species, they'd have to be a pretty strong case for that. But that being said, I guess I'd be open to the emergency request pool.
Mark Stern and then Jennifer Weichel, please.
Yeah, I guess I would just second some of the comments that Kristen offered and others. I think the urgent grant request is an opportunity and a pathway for things that come up more immediately. And I guess in an application, if somebody was to say, we propose to do this conservation easement or this land acquisition, and we're going to ask for $400,000, which includes $100,000 that we put as a down payment last week. I could see how we could consider those together. I'm not interested in going back, to sort of replace money that's already been raised or to help somebody eliminate a debt that they committed themselves to some years ago, but sort of in the process of helping an active transaction, which I suppose might be a little hard to define. I could see how the PFA could fill a good role there and help create some opportunities, and hopefully this could be addressed through the urgent grant process.
Jennifer Weichel, please.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic and a good conversation. I really appreciated Chad's comments that, any kind of project like this needs to have a very clear connection to the covered species and providing that conservation uplift. Where I'm struggling with in my mind is trying to figure out, envisioning in the future when we're either thinking about, the competitive grants, and we have to compare something like this compared to the other projects that are coming forward, which who knows what those will look like. And so it just makes me a little nervous that we may feel that we have to fund something that, or reimburse because it's already in progress as compared to other projects. And then with the urgent grant, I think something like this, probably with any project, we have to consider if we spend all our money on something like this, how does that, so there's got to be a weighing of all pieces, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We don't want to lose that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I guess I want to comment that I like Kristen am sympathetic to the need for the mechanism to act quickly at times by these land trusts and the value that would be provided by the reimbursement option. The obviously the driver for us is going to be some kind of demonstrable long-term protection for habitats that benefit the species. So I mean that's going to be the driver in all our grant making here. So we need to see that in a land acquisition. I guess I would say that like Mark noted, that I could see some circumstances where we might be open to it, though, where it was an extraordinarily beneficial parcel that was going to be converted to a golf course and we wanted to be able to, and somebody committed resources to stop. Nothing against golf, but if they're in the wrong place, it may not be desirable. So that in that case, we may want to have the option. So I guess I would be open to removing or reimbursement of previous land acquisitions, but still leaving the door open to someone to ask for that, not positively excluding or prohibiting that kind of a request. So Sarah and then Heath.
Thanks, Bob. That actually was very close to what I was going to recommend as well. If you look at, so section F, line 191, I think is where that reimbursement of previous land acquisitions was struck. But then if you go down to section K, it talks about, and that was struck too, but maybe we can consider it. It talks about pre-project costs, or what in the federal grant world is referred to as pre-award costs. And I guess I have a little bit of a concern that if we decide right now that these sorts of requests should come through the urgent grant lever, I think we're going to see what Mark Stern was concerned about, which is everyone starts looking at urgent grants as the way to come to the MAC with those types of projects, and that gets exercised maybe more than the regular grant option. Or I think that has that unintended consequence of urgent grants becoming more the norm rather than the exception. And so leaving the door open now and potentially allowing for the MAC to consider reimbursement of pre-award costs if directly associated with the proposed activities in the grant, or that language could even be strengthened. For example, in the federal rules, it says pre-award costs are those incurred prior to the start / effective date of the award, directly pursuant to the negotiation and in anticipation of the award where such costs are necessary for efficient and timely performance of the scope of work. So the MAC would have that full opportunity to evaluate the merits of the project as a whole and then consider pre-award costs. They may still be able to go forward with the project without the pre-award costs, but at least it leaves the door open for you to have that sort of discretion in the moment. But directs people to the regular grant pathway more than the urgent grant pathway.
Thank you, sir. I will just note that that's flagged below in K. So we've got both of those flagged as the section here on the previous land acquisition, as well as what Sarah was referring to for discussion as well, which is the reimbursement of pre-project costs, which we discussed in an earlier meeting. Heath and then Chad, please.
So I just want to reiterate my substitution concern. Again, one, I would like to communicate to applicants very clearly that they should not bet on the that this committee is going to fund them. That to me strikes me as really bad policy. They shouldn't put themselves at risk if we don't fund them, because that puts us in a bad political spot. I don't like the feel of that at all. And to the degree that they are in a position to fund it anyway, that is to say, they already have the money, that they're not betting on the then in effect, what we're doing is we are enabling them to spend that money on other things. And we are backdooring that organization's alternative priorities without any say over what those priorities are. I don't like the feel at all of us reimbursing commitments that they make in advance of this MAC proceeding. To me, that raises a substitution concern, and it in effect puts state money in a position of being deployed in ways that we don't have any say over. And so I appreciate the but are not limited to. Fine, we have to keep that language. I would favor removing both of these highlighted green costs, and we can just address them as they come up. But I also want to make clear that from my perspective, in advance of approval by the MAC, I am going to be personally very skeptical of expenditures that are seeking reimbursement, because it is, again, in effect, enabling that organization to spend that money on other things that we're not providing input on.
Chad and then Mark, please.
Yeah, I'll just support exactly what Heath was saying. Is with that substitution effect, it's allowing decisions to be made without any MAC oversight. The money is already spent, and I'm uncomfortable with that. And then when we do reimburse, that frees up those funds for them to go and be used again without any MAC advice. So just seconding everything that Heath is saying there.
Mark.
Yeah, just a couple perspectives. I think, as most of you know, I worked for the Nature Conservancy for a long time, and I would say the general experience I was involved with there is, and with other land trusts, I think too, mostly in acquiring property, you get an option. And then when you have that option period of whatever it is, 6 or 12 months, that's the time when the organization goes around and says, how do we line up with whatever additional funding, be it private or public, might be available? And they would begin to prepare a application and talk up their interest in their effort. So I think any organization that goes and buys the land completely knows they're on the hook, and they're not going to get any commitment from OWEB or ODF&W or anybody else for land. So I think it's rare. I can't remember where anybody sort of asked for a definitive commitment in advance of buying it. But during that option period is where those active conversations occur, and where there's time for an urgent grant application to be developed and advanced. So I'm comfortable with leaving the language as it is. I think also I share that same substitution concern. I don't think we want to go there, and if the property's paid off for, that's over and done. That's water under the bridge, and we're looking for active projects that we get a chance to weigh in on.
And I could see them, Mark, like I'd agree with that, and I've helped draft those options. The trick there is, again, are we going to reimburse them for the price of the option, right? Because there's usually some cost associated with acquiring that option. And to me, I think, again, that's an appropriate cost for nonprofits to fundraise for. Like, many of us personally donate to the Nature Conservancy, and the money that I donate there can be used to fund acquiring options on property. To me, what an eligible project under the MAC would include would be the acquisition costs, right? And that would not include reimbursement of the option price. But again, we can approach this as the circumstances arise. Addressing it in hypotheticals is hard. To me, I would delete both of the highlighted passages here, but retain the "but are not limited to" at the beginning there, and we can tackle this as projects are presented to us.
Fran, do you have anything to add, or Andrew? I think we have not heard from either of you on this topic.
We can go back and look at the video and see me like putting thumbs up. Maybe I should do that with the emojis. I appreciate this discussion and agree with what Heath just said, and Chad too, and appreciate it. Thanks.
Andrew.
Yeah, my apologies. I was flying up from LA and just joined the conversation midstream, so I'm processing at this point.
Okay, well, I think we started earlier with a specific suggestion for Chad, and it sounds like that's pretty much been amended by Heath to remove both of the highlighted passages here, but also acknowledging that these kinds of requests would not be prohibited. They could fall under the broader are not limited to, or even under J, taking other measures. Is some broad language that may open the door there. So let's turn to that as a specific motion. Chad, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Bob, I was just gonna kind of make the motion again to strike the highlighted language and have everything kind of fall under that, but are not limited to. And we'll see how many urgent grant requests we get, and hopefully there's enough collaboration within the land trust community to understand that it's probably not in anyone's best interest to flood the advisory committee with a bunch of urgent requests, so that we can retain the ability to fund those things at all.
Is there a second for this motion?
I would second that.
Is there any more discussion on the motion to strike the highlighted language in F and K? Mark Stern.
Well, I think we're all on the same page. I'm not as sure I'm as comfortable striking the language because it's all about may. So there's nothing that obligates us to. I especially like the language in K where applicants may request reimbursement of pre-project costs if directly associated with the proposed activities in the grant, which is presumably something we've approved. So personally, I would rather leave that language in, but it doesn't. But again, it's a caveat, may approve. We don't have to approve it. And the same with reimbursement, may. So I think it helps to have it put out there that it's something that's in the playing field. It doesn't mean we'll fund it, but we could.
Kristen, please.
Yeah, I'm somewhat aligned with Mark specifically on the language in K. And the logic I have there is that those pre-project costs, and maybe not option payments necessarily, but title reports, appraisals, things like that, do have significant cost. And I worry that if the burden is solely placed on the land trust, you end up with only a couple of large land trusts being able to be effective. And we may want to be encouraging some of the smaller land trusts that have closer ties to these rural communities that we're working in to be able to be successful. And so I think that that fundraising challenge is real on costs like that. And to the extent we're coming to a project at the point at which we're endorsing that it's, to Jennifer's comments, really well aligned with the goals of the HCP, truly advancing the mitigation goals that we have. If there were some significant expenses associated with doing the due diligence that we're in part basing our analysis of the viability and appropriateness of the project on, I guess I'm comfortable with like a 6-month look back or something like that, where it's been, to Mark's point, a really active project. I do view F a little bit differently, and I'm more comfortable striking the language on that part. And, if there's a really compelling case that an applicant wants to make, they can certainly bring almost anything forward. But that might be my proposal to kind of compromise between the two places, would be to keep K, but remove F.
And I would just point out also, K is not only about it's not necessarily land trust or acquisition. It's for a host of projects.
I've got, well, Andrew and then Mark, if you're still interested, and then back to Chad.
Yeah, I guess it's a follow-up question for Chad and Keith. Based on what Kristen just said, as I catch up to this, I heard you guys say it was really this reimbursement of previous acquisitions that was the primary concern. And do you see that distinction between that and these costs that Kristen described in her summary? Sorry, I'm going to mute.
Chad, would you like to speak to that question, or Heath, on whether there's a distinction regarding K? If
Yeah, I think there's a distinction. Absolutely, I think they're in the same vein, and I'm still a little uncomfortable funding prior to award, because it can still, if these costs truly are significant, and they're taking loans out from the organization mentioned earlier, or they're putting their skin in the game, that does create pressure on Andy and us to then fund them. And if we don't, then how does that make us look? I just am concerned about those retroactive payments, particularly with the acquisition. So I can amend my motion to just strike F, but I would then have another motion to strike K separately. If we can all agree on F and need more discussion around K, we can do that.
Heath, please.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about the nonprofit world on this, and Mark, you do. But I just like Hampton would never like prep a project and then come to this body and say the costs it took us to prepare our application should be paid for by this body. Like, to me, that's just part of doing the work. And again, to the degree I was willing to suffer those costs to bring an application to this body, whether that's an appraisal or most prelims are free, but title reports are, but if I were willing to suffer those costs, then by the MAC reimbursing Hampton for those costs, that just frees me up to spend it on, other Hampton priorities. I just, again, to me, reimbursement of pre-approval costs, maybe there's just something I'm not understanding about that. I struggle with the need. If I would rather, how about if I put it this way, Bob and Dyke, I would rather leave K in and delete the language in F than have a contentious split vote of this body. I don't actually think that's healthy for our work, and I'm willing to accommodate that. But I want to make known where I'm coming from on this. I really feel like if people are willing to spend money in advance of getting approval from this body, then they should be willing to do that without reimbursement from this body. The alternative is that we are giving them money to spend on other priorities.
Sarah, and then I've got my own hand up, and then Kristen.
I had a question for Mark Grenbeamer. And that is, does OWEB allow for pre-award costs on any of its grants? Maybe Mark's not around.
Mark, are you with us?
Or Andy, do you know?
I'm not sure for OWEB, but in my experience with grants, I haven't seen it that often. I have seen it, but it's more rare. But I'm not sure for OWEBs.
So I'm so if we get Mark, we'll with Sarah Gregory. Maybe Sarah, do you have the answer?
Hi, everybody. I don't have an answer related to state funding options, but I just wanted to share that right now in the district that I'm managing, we're working on a grant that NOAA is offering under the coastal zone management. It's some long convoluted name, but they specifically call out reimbursing under a buy and hold option. I'm looking at the language right now in their document, and it says for a period of less than 3 years from the publication date of this funding announcement, they will consider reimbursing for property acquisition. And they will also reimburse holding costs, eligible subject to a limit of 5% of the total award. So there's just one example, and honestly, it's really going to benefit us in acquiring about 500 acres for a wildlife area that we have near the coast. And we wouldn't have this option if there wasn't a land trust sort of organization holding the property so that we can apply for the funds. So that's just one example.
Great, thank you for that, Sarah. So I think I actually am fine leaving the language as it is in both. And my rationale is that I want to have the maximum set of tools that we can use to benefit these species. And if we decide in a particular case that reimbursing a land acquisition is desirable because we're really convinced that in this particular case that the land will have to be sold, or that there's extraordinary benefit to the species by doing so, that we've got the ability to do so. Similarly, with pre-project costs, we may in some cases want to make that investment in an organization because we really want to encourage and reward a particular type of activity that's going on. So, to my mind, of course, these are all mays, right? And in the end, the committee can make whatever decisions it wants. I think it is important for whoever's out there listening now or in the future to not bet on anything with this committee. We've got such a broad list of things that we could potentially fund. To go in it very hopeful that you'll be funded in advance is not wise. So, but I guess my sense, I'm comfortable pulling it out and leaving it under not limited to, if that's where folks are. But I also feel comfortable just leaving it in and leaving it to future committees to look at what comes across the plate. Now, we may find out in doing that we get a whole bunch of requests to review, previous acquisitions more than we're able to process, and we do discover that it's not desirable to consider those for funding. But at this point, I'd be comfortable leaving in there. Chad.
Well, Bob, it sounds like there's a lot of different thoughts on both of these items. And most people were comfortable with striking F and leaving K. I've made it clear that I would rather not see either of them. But I also agree with Heath that we need to be able to work together and all pull in the same direction here. So I would like to amend my motion to just strike F around retroactive payment for land acquisitions that have already happened, and keep the language around K, the due diligence costs. That means you're leading right up to a project. But, retroactive payment for land acquisition, I can't do that. So is there any way we can just amend the motion, strike F, keep K, and understand that not limited to language stays at the top?
Chad, will you accept that amendment to the motion? Heath, pardon me.
Yes, I'd second that amendment.
Okay, Kristen.
I made that suggestion and continue to be supportive. And I was just going to say that really I'm comfortable with any of the versions of this, because in all cases it's may and not limited to, and really at the discretion of the committee. So I think we do send some signals to applicants that can drive what comes in the door. But I think in all cases, the committee's retaining the ability to support or reject any proposal based on the merits and its benefit to the species and the HCP objectives. So I'm not going to fall on my sword on any of these versions. I think it's all there no matter what we do with the language.
Okay, well, I think we need to bring this to a vote, and I see the motion on the table is to accept the deletion in F, but leave K as written. I believe it captures the current motion. So are there any other comments on this? All right, let's, Mark. Grenbremer, I see you're with us here. Please, Mark.
Yeah, apologies. I was having some technical issues and dropping off seemed to have solved that and coming back. But I wanted to try to address the comment about or the question regarding OWEB in approach to reimbursement of pre-project costs. And it might be helpful if the question was restated, but as far as in our open solicitation program, which I primarily work with, we do a small area of pre-project reimbursement, and those are generally project costs around permitting. We won't reimburse for main project activities like construction or implementation until after the grant has been approved by our board. And so any of those construction costs or anything like that, if it's done before our board approves it, we'll count it as match, but we won't do reimbursement. But sometimes there's specific permitting things, especially around land use forms. That's a statutory requirement that we have where we will reimburse those costs. So there are some situations. Miriam Forney is our acquisition specialist in OWEB, and I'm going to basically generally say that we do reimbursement of previous land acquisition costs, and I'm not going to go into specifics because I'll immediately get myself in trouble with her, and she'll hunt me down and kick me. But we do it's really the only program where we have that kind of a allowance for the pre-project stuff.
Great.
More specifically, it could cover costs, with the purchase price and option fees. It could cover the interest on the bridge loans, staff costs incurred as part of the process, due diligence activities, closing fees, things like that. But I'd be happy to get maybe Miriam involved a little more if there's more specific detail that's needed than I can provide, if that would be helpful, but I don't think I could get her this quick.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. Andy, see your hand up there?
Only comment I was going to say is that just a reminder that the committee, as they're reviewing applications, can work with an application to modify it. So if one does come in and that's just a portion of the application, the committee does have the power to work with them on it and change that application. Also, that being said, with these staying in here, just be aware, like someone said earlier, especially in K, applicants will put that in their project. So it will require either enhanced review, more time, or whatnot. But just want to make that aware that it will most likely get, especially K, getting included in the application.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. So we've got a motion on the table and a second. We need to close the debate unless there are other urgent comments to make. Just to restate it, the motion is to remove or reimbursement of previous land acquisitions in section F and to retain the current language in K. Andy, can you please call the roll? And those in favor will be an aye. Those against, nay. Please call the roll, Andy. Andy, you're on mute there. Could you call the roll, please?
Apologies. Chad Washington.
Yay.
Sorry, guys, I'm writing this out at the same time. Bob Van Dyke.
Yay.
Kristen Rivard.
Yay.
Heath Curtis.
Yes.
Andrew Perky.
Yay.
And Mark Stern.
Yay.
The ayes pass. Motion's approved.
Hey, did I not get to vote?
Did you call Fran?
Sorry, Fran.
I'm also yay. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay, the motion passes. Thanks everybody for that discussion. I do want to emphasize that for anyone listening out there, for example, land trust community, obviously there's still time to contact the commission or even this body with more information if it's helpful going forward. We're just making a recommendation here. Okay, I think there's one other substantive, well, two briefly matters to touch on. Down at line 237 on monitoring. This relates to a comment I made earlier and to what Andy noted earlier, that project applications shall provide a monitoring plan to measure performance of the implemented project. I guess my concern there was that maybe that's a little bit, that I wasn't sure what that meant, or that applicants will know what it means to measure performance. So I don't have a specific amendment or suggestion there, but I was concerned about the language maybe. Now we could clarify that, I assume, in the grant outlines, in the grant guidelines, but you know, Sarah or Andy. Andy, I see you have your hand up. I'll go to you and then Heath.
Yeah, I was just going to clarify real quick, took the words from my mouth there, Bob, that yes, a lot, you know, these OARs are kind of the bones. The grant guidelines will allow us to provide that clarity and instructions to the applicants. The monitoring plan to measure performance, that's in there as a safeguard for future stuff, in all honesty. We don't know what monitoring is going to come down to. So that's kind of a safeguard on monitoring in the future. That's why that was in there.
Heath?
I was just going to make the same comment that you made, Bob, that I think we can give them some instruction. I just know, and Jennifer, you may have thoughts on this as well, that one of the challenges we had with the Oregon Plan for Salmon and Watersheds is that we didn't do a very good job of tracking and monitoring the effectiveness of those investments over time. And as a result, the federal services, well, they gave us a lot of trouble about that, including in the Cesara disapproval and on the recovery and the status reviews on the COHO. And so I think it's really advisable that we do have monitoring associated with these projects, so much so that, you know, I would favor us funding them independently, you know, maybe even not through the applicant. But I do think that this language is sufficiently generic that we could define better what that means in guidance in the application. And I am in favor of them including a monitoring plan with their project.
Thanks, Heath. I'll just call on myself briefly to say that there's a big question of effectiveness monitoring. That is, is the mitigation project and the investments producing what we hope they will for the HCP? And that feels like a big question that needs to be informed by some significant study design probably, and the HCP conversation as well. At the very least, we want the applicants to provide some bare bones, at least information. Did you complete the project that you said were completed? Were the areas affected that you said they were going to affect it? I don't think we want necessarily them being on the hook to monitor populations of species or something. That's going to be in a different framework. So anyway, putting this in as a placeholder is fine, that we then expand on in guidelines. I think we all recognize there's work to do there. Jennifer Weichel and then Heath again, or just Jennifer.
Yeah, I just was going to mention that we're just starting to have some conversations with our services representatives on the HCP kind of about this question, some other monitoring. So it's really too early to say. I will say the initial input we have is that, you know, monitoring of projects as far as like if it's a actual on the ground project that we're looking at proper implementation and construction, that's been identified as important. In other words, that's sort of like, did you do what you say you were going to do? But the effectiveness monitoring, that's like a big can of worms that we have to figure out, because we're going to be funding such a variety of project types that it'll be almost impossible to have a good effectiveness monitoring program that's specifically tied to this. And then our adaptive management program that's under the HCP is just looking at rules. So I would just point out that this is a to be determined question, at least as it pertains to the HCP.
Thank you.
Fine. And from my perspective, I mean, for us, it was just like, is the riprap still there? Right? Is the culvert still there and not perched? Right? Is the buffer that you left next to the stream still there? You know, that kind of just foundational monitoring is what we got hammered on.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that. Okay, so we'll look forward to further conversations and updates, but in any case, the guidance can reflect this. Can flesh out more what we mean by in the required plan to measure performance. The last edit just follows the earlier one. It's in line 242. The department, it had said in collaboration with the MAC shall not recommend, and I suggested at the direction of the MAC. I'm not sure if that's needed there or not, but that's just parallel construction from some earlier portion. So I did want to, any comments or thoughts, if it matters one way or another. In any case, the department is being told not to recommend certain types of projects. I'm not even sure the MAC needs to be in that that clause. Comments on one way or another? Mark Stern.
I'd just say your edit looks fine.
Okay. All right. Well, hearing no objections, we'll just leave it at the direction of the MAC. And I think at this point, certainly the department is directed to follow the rules. So I'm not sure there's much more to do with us on that. I guess perhaps the department would inform us if there were rejected grants on these criteria. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Are there any other comments anybody wants to bring up on these rules? Okay. Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the rules as amended through discussion today?
I
So
move
moved.
to approve the rules as amended by the discussion today.
I'll second that.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Is there any more discussion? I just want to express my appreciation for everybody's engagement and thoughtfulness in this process. Andy, can you please call the roll? Oh, you're on mute there, Andy, again.
I'm sorry, who was the second for the motion?
I think it was Heath. Heath, were you the second remark? I couldn't tell.
I was.
Thank you. All right, I will do roll call. Chad Washington,
Yay.
Paul Van Dyke,
Yay.
Kristen Rivard,
Yay.
Keith Curtis,
Yes.
Fran Cafferata,
Yay.
Andrew Perky,
Yay.
Mark Stern.
Yay.
All right, back to you, Bob.
Great. The motion's approved. Thanks, everybody. And thanks particularly to OPFW staff and all the work they put into shaping up this today. We're a good hour behind schedule. Onward we go. Let's move briefly, if we may, Andy, to the MAC working group topic.
Yes. Yeah. Did you want me to lead that, Bob, or did you want to hop in there?
Well, I guess I'll just note briefly that there is a work group consisting of Heath, Mark Stern, and myself, who will be working on the review process. That is, how are the review teams composed? What information do they get? And we'll work to bring some options back to everybody on that so we can have that shaped up in time for the review to take place. I think a major document needing attention is the grant guidelines. And I'll turn that part over to you, Andy. I think
Yes.
basically you would like to solicit some assistance in reviewing the grant guidelines. Is that correct?
Correct. So thank you. So for the grant guidelines, you guys have seen some iterations of it over the last quarter at this point. I've been frantically updating that as our conversations have dynamically changed from one meeting to the other. But at this point, that document, as I've said probably too many times, is a culmination of all of our work. That's going to be the instructions for the applicants. They're going to pick that up when we release our RFP. They're going to read through it. They're going to know everything A to Z, how to apply, what's eligible, and all that good stuff. With that document has all the templates that also need to be looked at. So we've been working behind the scenes to create agreements and other stuff and get all that filed and squared away. But we're at a point now where I would like to have an external group work with me on these grant guidelines more immediately so we can prep for our fall launch, because this is our next big milestone we need to get wrapped up and cleaned up, especially after these OARs are now finalized. So I'm looking proud. Remember, we can't go above 5, so at least, you know, three or four members, if that's committee, or ex officios, 2 would be great. And we probably will be meeting, this is a higher priority, about every other week for the next few weeks. I do plan to give hopefully an update at the next meeting on these grant guidelines. September, we have a pretty in-depth discussion hopefully on them. But that's what I'm looking for. So we'll be doing a general review of the entire document, an evaluation of what's left out, and looking at the templates, what's needed, what do we need to remove. Any questions on that before we kind of call for some people to join that committee or that working group?
Mark Stern, please.
Just a minor question, but you know, I've struggled a little bit to track documents with names, but is this what you're calling the grant guidelines?
Yes, it is. Correct.
But it'd be helpful somewhere on the cover title to have grant guidelines.
It is. I'm trying to keep track of them too. You got me on that one.
But
I think it's programmatic guidelines on that.
yeah, that's what it says.
Yeah.
I know you know it intuitively, but when I, you know, get on the Google web page every couple of weeks, then I have to sort of recalibrate what we're talking about.
So Mark, it sounds like you're volunteering for the grant guideline group there. Is that, given that you've got them ready at hand?
I'm glad to participate, but just to be aware, we're going to be, you know, kayaking and out of Communicado for about 10 days, the end of July and early August. But I'm glad to look at stuff before that and comment more immediately in the next week, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Andrew?
Yeah, Andy, these are the guidelines for applicants. Is that correct? Okay, so this tracks with the work we've done previously on the proposal form and
yes,
such.
so this is the first thing applicants will see. It's one of the most critical documents, I would argue, for the applicants.
To
and
help really
direct them
guide
to everything
them.
else.
Okay, I can participate on that.
Anybody else up there? And I want to actually first say Chris Allen is also part of the work group on the review team. So thanks, Chris, for joining that. Sounds like Mark and Andrew are willing to participate. Any other willing participants for the grant guidelines, which should be to some extent a summation of other work drawn together into a single document.
Yeah, it'd be helpful to have one more body on this, guys. I'm gonna pull hairs here.
Officio, and ex officio who are so experienced in grant making. Mark?
We got Mark there. Thanks, Mark.
Fantastic.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks to the three of you. And Andy, I'll of course be helpful and try to chime in and look over some things too as I may. So, okay, great. We're done with that. We've got 15 minutes left.
Bob, I just had one suggestion for that subcommittee that, or working group, sorry, that similar to Kristen's suggestion about maybe having beta testers for the grant management system, you might consider outreach to a few
good point.
A few folks that are sort of very active in the grant application world to maybe just as an end user doing a clarity review for you. Do the grant guidelines, are they user friendly? Do they make sense?
That's a great suggestion. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Sarah. it'd be good to even just walk them through the whole process, really. Here's the guidelines and here's all the steps of what you're going to need to do to get that tested. Well, we've got 2 items left, each of which were scheduled for half an hour. The ODF&W Director's Office presentation and Jennifer's HCP presentation. I do know that some of you have a hard stop, so I don't know if we want to try to squeeze in a presentation here, delay those in the future in which case we may need some even longer meetings or just add some time, because we have quite a few presentations coming up on priorities from the agencies. So I guess I turn to the committee now, and in the remaining 15 minutes, or we can run over if folks can stay extra. Any comments on that? Yes, please, Sarah.
I know Debbie's got a hard stop at 2:15 as well, and expressed flexibility to move to August if necessary.
And I know Jennifer's got some flexibility there as well. Well, we could try the director's presentation for half an hour, unless everyone would like to see that, which I imagine that's an important one. As the HCP are, who can stay, who has to leave at 2, I guess. Raise your hand if you need to leave at 2. Seeing Andrew and Heath have to leave at 2.
Hey, Bob, if I could add in, I think that HCP presentation might be very helpful to some applicants right now, because that's part of the audience too. And we've gotten questions on the HCP, and that way we can give a little bit more time to Debbie too and not cut it. But I really think that if Jennifer can fit in her presentation, it might be very useful to the ones on the call today.
Okay, I think we'll still have a quorum remaining. It looks like we'll lose 3 at 2, but why don't we go ahead and when we'll look to Debbie for the to be at the next meeting. And Jennifer, if you're willing to go ahead and give your presentation. We've got 13 minutes left, so we'll expect you to run over, of course.
Okay, it should last about 13 minutes, so depends on Q&A and how fast I talk. Okay, let me try to share my screen. Okay, are you seeing the slideshow mode?
Yes.
All right. So so thanks for giving me the time to chat about the HCP. What I'm going to talk about is to give just a high level overview of the HCP document and kind of where we're heading with development and content. And then towards the end, make a connection to the mitigation program, and then update on the project timeline. And I cannot see the team screen at all. So if there's any questions, someone's going to have to chime in and interrupt me. Okay, so really quick, the HCP that we're developing really is in effect translating the commitments made through the PFA agreement and into an HCP format, which has the ultimate goal of obtaining the incidental take permit for our covered species, which will trickle down to our covered landowners. So the HCP in and of itself is really based on the private forest accord documents. So the content, the bulk of the content relating to the conservation measures particularly, is based very closely on the PFA statutes and rules that were changed, and then also the content of the private forest accord report. So just a key point here is that ODF is not really, that we are not adding any new conservation measures. What we're doing is translating what was agreed to and the changes made to law into the HCP document. So one of the key areas, though, that is new is that we have to describe and quantify the benefits and impacts to the covered species through the effects analysis. And so this is really what's translating the conservation measures into how it relates directly to the species. So we're doing that. And then ultimately the HCP has to meet all the requirements for Section 10 under the ESA so that we can obtain the incidental take permits from National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which we refer to collectively just as the services. So another important aspect about this HCP is it's a programmatic HCP. And what that means is that the agreement is singular between ODF and the services, but we're having a trickle down effect to multiple landowners. So the commitment, the contract will be between ODF and the federal agencies, but the HCP, its implementation is really through our administration of the Forest Practices Act and then also the related programs. And then through that, landowners will receive the Endangered Species Act regulatory assurances as essentially a pass-through through the compliance with the Forest Practices Act regulations. So I've been using the term regulatory HCP. I don't think that's a real term in HCP lingo, but it works well for me and just kind of how my brain thinks. Bear with me, I got off track here. Okay. So our covered landowners under this HCP are all private forest landowners throughout the state. So both west and east and small landowners, large landowners. And then also we're covering counties and municipalities that own forest lands. All right, so the covered activities, so this is all HCP lingo, but the covered activities, so what will be under the incidental take permits and the HCP, are primarily related to the forest management activities. So we're writing it in a way such that forest management that's regulated under the Forest Practices Act will be covered activities. So timber harvesting, road building, culvert replacements. I'm just trying to think of normal activities off the top of my head. The one activity that's specifically excluded it's in the PFA report and the statutes, is the application of pesticides and herbicides. That will not be a covered activity and therefore not under the incidental take permits. The other activities that are mentioned in the report as covered activities, and I believe this is also in the statutes, is restoration work and mitigation projects. So the kind of work that this program is funding. So if it's related to the PFA program, it will be covered under the incidental take permits. And then also activities related to monitoring or research that's conducted by ODF or through our adaptive management program committee. Okay, our covered species. So the PFA report says that the covered species are all native salmon and trout. And then in addition, mountain whitefish, Pacific Euchelon, and green sturgeon. And so this is the list that we've came up with for fish. It will include all ESUs or population units within the state. So here's our fish list. And then also, we have 5 species of stream amphibians that are covered under the HCP. So that's both the copes and coastal giant salamander, the coastal tailed frog, and then also the southern torrent and Columbia torrent salamanders are going to be included in the HCP as covered species. Okay, so conservation measures. This is really the bulk of the meat of the HCP and what is the PFA agreement. So the conservation measure chapter is still being developed as well as the rest of the document. But what it is it describes the actions that are implemented to avoid and minimize take of the covered species. So that's HCP terminology, but it's the conservation lift that the agreement is giving. The PFA agreement is giving to the covered species compared to where we started, which was the baseline Forest Practices Act rules. So all conservation measures in the HCP come straight from the PFA report, the statutes, changes and then our regulatory changes in rules. As I mentioned, ODF, there's nothing new that we're creating in this section. So also the biological goals and objectives are important with regards to the mitigation program. These are a key component of any HCP. The biological goals and objectives were developed by the PFA authors after the publication of the report, so you won't find them in the actual PFA report. They are in the 2022 draft of the HCP that was submitted to the Board of Forestry, and we can provide that document or a link to it later. So in general, there's one overarching goal, and this is verbatim straight out of the text. It says forest. So this is the overarching goal of the HCP, if you think of it that way. Forest practices that support the survival and recovery of the covered species by providing clean, cool, connected, and complex habitats. And then in addition to that, we have 4 primary goals. And this text is not verbatim. I just summarized it so it would fit nicely on the slide. And so essentially the 4 biological goals are clean water and substrates, shade and cool water, stream network connectivity. So that's, connectivity for movement. And then also complex habitats within riparian management areas. And then under each of these 4 goals, there's biological objectives, which I'm not sharing here just for sake of time. So also the HCP chapter, as far as how we're structuring it, we have 5 conservation measures that we're describing under the current draft. And these really are the changes, again, under the PFA agreement. So the first one is the riparian management areas that describes changes to the rules for stream buffers. The second is timber harvest on steep slopes. So again, describing the regulatory changes for that particular area. Roads is the third one. Again, describing changes to our road rules under Forest Practices Act. The fourth one is beaver conservation, and that one is interesting because it's the one conservation measure that is not under ODF's authority at all. It lies solely under ODF&W's authority. And then the last one, the mitigation and restoration funding, is where this program fits. And we also have our SFISH program under this conservation measure. And that's the funding that Fran mentioned earlier. That's for small landowners to help them be able to do culvert replacement for failed culverts on their lands. Okay, really quickly about mitigation projects. We are we're still working on drafting some of the text in the document on this, so it's a little bit rough still. But in general, mitigation projects are intended to to provide conservation benefit to the covered species. And they're also intended to offset the negative impacts of the covered species, not accounted for through the conservation measures if needed. So what that means is that if the conservation measures themselves were not enough lift, the mitigation projects are meant to account for any additional negative impacts or incidental take that might occur. So this program, where it really ties in with the HCP, first of all, it is very important that it's tied to the HCP because that's the whole goal of the program. But the mitigation projects that are funded really must address the needs of the HCP covered species. So not all of them, but one or more. And then ideally the projects that are funded will improve conditions for the covered species as indicated in our biological goals and objectives as described in the HCP text. So we're looking for a connection kind of in those 2 places. Okay, so lastly is the HCP timeline. You don't have to read this text. I'll go through it and I can share this timeline later if needed. This timeline starts in 2023, here in Q1, where we're calling phase 2 of the HCP project. Phase 1 was when, after the PFA agreement was finalized. We had to have a draft completed and submitted by the end of 2022. And so that was phase 1. And so we're actively in this phase 2. So you could ignore this first chunk of blue rows. That's really just meetings and some other stuff. The second row here describes the development of our administrative draft HCP. That is what we are working on right now. So that draft is due to be finished in the end of 2024. And then also with that, so once that draft is done, that's what will be submitted to the services along with the notice of intent to really initiate the NEPA process. The next deadline is the end of 2025. That's when the public draft HCP should be available, as well as the administrative draft. Sorry, there's no arrow, but down here, the brown box, this is for the administrative draft of our environmental impact statement. And then the 2027 is a really key year for us. So Senate Bill 1501 mandated that we have the incidental take permits in hand by the end of 2027, or essentially the PFA agreements and all the changes to statute and rules will roll back. So it's a really key year. The deadline is the end of 2027, but we have set a buffer in our schedule so that we are trying to complete this project by Q1 of 2027. So that would be the final draft HCP and our final EIS. And again, just noting the end of the timeline here at the end of 2027. So that's all I have in a nutshell. I don't know if there's any questions. Let me see if I can get out of the screen. There we go. Now I can see you guys. And should I stop sharing? I just did.
Yeah, you can stop sharing. There we go. Well, thank you for that, Jennifer. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I know that was really quick, but Mark.
Thank you. Super helpful, Mark. Yes.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Just going back in the beginning, I think, the incidental take statement goes to the state. I guess I was trying to, and I thought what you said was the individual projects funded by the PFA are covered, get ESA coverage under this take statement. So I guess I'm just trying, it's sort of like a programmatic incidental take statement for the PFA project. So individual restoration projects funded under PFA, do they need to do their own ESA consultation, or are they covered by?
Yeah, my answer to that is I think the devil's in the details on the timing. So we will not have any incidental take permit in hand, we're assuming till 2027. Right. So there's no coverage at all until then. We are drafting the current version of the HCP to include incidental take coverage for mitigation projects funded under this program. But again, the HCP is very much in draft. We've not at all initiated formal conversations with the services. We're meeting with them frequently, but not they've not seen a formal draft or had a chance for input. So it's a bit in flux, but we're anticipating we'll have coverage after 2027.
Chris, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to address your question, Mark. It's a good one. I'm having some internal dialogue right now with our Section 7 experts, and maybe we could tee this up at our next meeting, and I can give at least some initial feedback on how to provide that take coverage for those mitigation projects, at least in the interim before the HCP is completed.
Yeah, that's a real. For everybody.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to note this could be a really important topic, because the extent people coming to this program don't have to go through normal consultation, that could really expedite the effects and the desirability of coming to this program. But obviously we want to make sure we're on sound legal ground, whatever happens there. And that's Chris, where you and your folks and Jennifer can help us understand what's there. So I do think that's a good topic for a future meeting. other questions or comments for Jennifer on her presentation? Okay, well, thank you, Andy. I hope you can post that on the meeting page. Thank you again, Jennifer. I want to thank everybody for their patience and engagement today. And I think we should be pleased with where the rules ended up. Just noting a couple things. Sarah, you're going to follow up with us on that organization issue, which we did vote on, but is there a better term maybe to stick in there going forward? And then you can keep us posted as to, if there are other comments or you see some other things you catch in the rules going forward. We've got a lot coming up. Andy and Chad and I will meet and Sarah and really try to scope out keeping us on time. We may need some more time for a long meeting, even longer meeting. We'll be in touch about that. And I think we also need to start talking about getting an in-person meeting together, ideally before the end of the year. So yeah, look for something from Andy. We'll talk a little bit about when that would be best to have, but then I think it'd be good for us to meet in person as well. So any other comments, questions for the good of order here at the end? Great. Thanks, everybody. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.